Do you dare to confront the most profound and often frightening truth about what happens at the moment of human death? The revelation we are about to explore, rooted in the meticulous documentation of Allan Kardec, the compiler and codifier of Spiritism, challenges everything modern society generally believes about the cessation of physical existence. We must first accept the unsettling premise that right now, as you read this, thousands of souls are wandering through the sterile halls of hospitals, utterly unaware of their discarnate state. They are held captive, not by physical bars, but by their own ignorance, psychological shock, and deep-seated material attachments. This is not a horror story designed to shock, but a deep spiritual truth based on decades of systematic communication with the spiritual world. Kardec's work, primarily through the Spirit's Book and the Medium's Book, provides a clear, rational, and logical framework for this reality. In the forthcoming minutes, we will not merely recount tales of spirits lingering, but delve into the sophisticated mechanics of disembodiment and the survival of the individual consciousness. If you have ever felt an inexplicable presence, a sudden chill in a room, or sensed a deep unspoken sorrow in a place of suffering, you may have already had a brush with this invisible world that coexists with ours. The reality of the perispirit, the semi-material body that houses the soul, and its persistence after the physical body fails, is the key to unlocking this mystery. This knowledge is an unparalleled force, capable of shattering the foundations of materialist beliefs and instilling a profound, rational hope regarding our own immortality. We are compelled to confront a world brimming with the emotional dramas of those who have crossed the threshold, their hopes for clarity, and their relentless, often confused pursuit of the light they cannot yet perceive. This is a call to deep reflection on life's possibilities beyond the visible spectrum. Kardec approached these phenomena not as a mystic, but as a dedicated investigator, using a strict methodology to ensure consistency and coherence across communications, thereby establishing a logical body of knowledge that extends the understanding of life's greatest enigma, replacing blind faith with informed conviction. The enduring mystery of human consciousness finds a powerful, rational explanation within the core tenets established by Allan Kardec. He didn't ask us to simply believe in the continuation of life. He presented a philosophy built on observable and repeatable spiritual phenomena, arguing that if the fact of communication with the deceased is established, the persistence of consciousness is the only logical conclusion. Kardec's work was anchored in what he termed universal agreement, comparing consistent spiritual testimonies received through various mediums across different locations, eliminating subjective fantasy and personal interpretation. This rigor transformed scattered spirit communication into a coherent philosophy. The essential finding is that consciousness, the I that defines our individuality, is intrinsically linked to the spirit, the intelligent principle, and not the transient physical body. When the physical body, the material instrument, ceases to function, the spirit, along with its perispirit, simply withdraws. This separation is the true meaning of death, and crucially, it does not alter the spirit's moral or intellectual state instantly. If a person was focused on earthly concerns, money, power, or specific routines in life, they remain focused on those things immediately after death. This explains the presence of highly confused and grounded spirits in hospitals and other places of intense earthly attachment. Kardec often posed the profound question: if consciousness survives and our individuality is preserved, then what enduring meaning do our choices, relationships, and actions hold? They become more than mere ephemeral gestures. They are the true currency of the spirit, determining its condition, its state of light or confusion, upon passing. The persistence of the spirit turns earthly life into a school of learning and moral refinement. The true purpose of our existence is not the temporary acquisition of material wealth or fame, but the lasting accumulation of moral virtues, knowledge, and above all, love. This enduring perspective grants all our actions an eternal weight and purpose, revealing the material world as just one dimension within a much grander, infinite tapestry of life. To truly understand the predicament of the lost soul in a hospital, one must grasp the concept of the perispirit. Kardec defined this as the semi-material envelope that links the spirit to the body during life and serves as the spirit's vehicle after death. It is composed of fluidic matter, emanating from the universal cosmic fluid, yet specific to the planet and tailored to the spirit's moral and intellectual advancement. The perispirit is often described as an ethereal duplicate of the physical body, retaining its form, which is why spirits are often recognized by those who knew them. The moment of death is fundamentally the rupture of the fluidic thread or cord that connects the perispirit to the physical body. This process is rarely instantaneous. For highly moral, spiritually prepared individuals, the separation can be rapid, painless, and serene, like slipping out of a coat. For those heavily immersed in materialism, strong passions, or sudden traumatic deaths, the separation is often agonizingly slow, feeling like an amputation. The perispirit remains so tightly intermingled with the dense matter that the spirit experiences the decay and cold of the corpse, or the acute shock of detachment. This explains the phenomenon, frequently reported in Kardec's works, of the recently deceased being deeply bewildered, looking down at their own lifeless form in the morgue or on the operating table, yet feeling absolutely certain that they are not that body. Their consciousness, their true self, is located in the fluidic form they now occupy. This dissociation is the initial jarring lesson in their new reality. They attempt to use the physical senses, to speak, to touch, to see in the physical way, and encounter only the devastating frustration of impotence as their fluidic hands pass through solid objects and their voices register only as unheard thoughts. This is the heart of the confusion. The spirit exists, but the primary tools for interacting with the world it knows have vanished. Hospitals are far more than structures of concrete, steel, and medical equipment. They are, in spiritual terms, highly charged interdimensional zones and spiritual portals. Allan Kardec's research extensively detailed how certain locations attract and retain discarnate entities due to the prevailing vibratory environment created by the living. In a hospital, the atmosphere is a turbulent mixture of the rawest human emotions, the acute physical pain of the sick, the profound despair of families, the fervent hope for recovery, the immense fear of death, and the often abnegated love and fatigue of dedicated professionals. This constant flux of intense emotional energy creates a dense fluidic field that acts like a spiritual magnet or a kind of emotional gravity well. For spirits who have just passed and are still low in spiritual vibration, often due to a life of material attachment or lack of moral preparation, this dense atmosphere provides a familiar and compatible frequency. They find themselves trapped, not by physical force, but by affinity and vibrational resonance. They cannot immediately perceive or rise to the higher, lighter spiritual spheres because their own consciousness is still vibrating at the low frequency of earthly preoccupation, fear, and sorrow that pervades the hospital. This energetic field can make the veil between the physical and spiritual planes extraordinarily thin, sometimes leading to unexplained phenomena, sudden cold spots, the feeling of being watched, or objects moving without cause. For those with even minimal mediumistic sensitivity, which Kardec asserted everyone possesses to some degree, these environments make the presence of spirits almost palpable. The hospital, therefore, serves as a tumultuous, unintentional spiritual nexus where the drama of both the living and the dead is played out simultaneously, making it a primary focus for spiritual assistance. The documented case of Adelino Silveira serves as a chilling, canonical example of a spirit caught in the dreadful state of post-mortem unawareness. Adelino, like many, suffered a sudden or shocking death, combined with a profound ignorance of his spiritual nature. After his heart stopped, his spirit found itself free from the body, yet his mind, trapped by routine and denial, refused to accept the reality of his passage. His consciousness, still localized to the environment he last knew, clung to the hospital. He continued his familiar patterns, walking the corridors, observing the living, and trying desperately to engage. His anguish was rooted in the utter invisibility and inaudibility he experienced. He was fully conscious, a thinking, feeling being, attempting to communicate his shock and confusion to nurses and doctors, but receiving no glance, no word, and no recognition. His screams were silent, his touch intangible. This ordeal is meticulously explained by the concept of the delayed separation of the perispirit. His spirit was so intertwined with the dense material energy of his earthly concerns that the detachment process was extended, leaving him in a dreadful limbo of confusion and cognitive dissonance. The greatest torment for such a soul is the sheer frustration of impotence, To exist, to have needs, to feel love or fear, yet be unable to interact with the world one still believes to be real. Adelino's reality was a perpetual loop of his last moments, a profound state of self-inflicted spiritual isolation, where the walls of his denial were thicker than any physical wall. He was not maliciously trapped by external forces, but by the psychological bonds of his own unyielding material attachment, proving that the greatest prison after death is the state of our own mind. The state of spiritual blindness experienced by many recently departed souls is a direct logical consequence of a life steeped in materialism and ignorance regarding spiritual laws. Kardec's communications repeatedly demonstrated that the most difficult transitions were experienced by those who held the unwavering conviction that physical death was the absolute end of consciousness. This belief, while perhaps comforting to them in life as it negated accountability, becomes a source of extreme confusion and suffering in the afterlife. Having consciously denied the existence of the spirit, they are entirely unprepared when they find themselves discarnate, fully aware, and unable to interact with the physical world. Their rigid mental framework, the result of decades of materialistic thought, prevents them from accepting their new fluidic reality. This denial acts as a psychological anchor, keeping them firmly tethered to the earthly plane, often near their body, their home, or the scene of their death. The spirit of Adelino and countless others found themselves in this desolate predicament, a conscious denial of their own existence, leading to weeks or months of wandering in a state of self-imposed psychological torment. Kardec stressed that spiritual education during life is the crucial preparation for the great transition, cultivating detachment from excessive material desires, fostering a clear understanding of the soul's immortality, and practicing the moral virtues of charity and love are the only true means of ensuring a swift, serene, and harmonious departure. To live solely for the body and the earth is to build a self-made prison that will house the soul upon its release from the flesh. The case of Maria Dolores, the dedicated nurse who remained tied to her hospital duties even after her death, illustrates the immense binding power of habitual routine and professional fixation. Maria's commitment to her work was admirable, fueled by duty and selfless devotion. However, when her physical heart failed, her spiritual will, still dominated by the deep-seated pattern of her 30 years of service, compelled her spirit to continue the very same routine. She was not trapped by fear or malice, but by the sheer unyielding inertia of her former life. She continued to see herself in her uniform, carrying her clipboard and feeling the urgency of patient care pulsing through her. This state of spiritual activity without physical efficacy is profoundly heartbreaking. She would try to check monitors, administer care, and comfort the grieving, only to find her efforts utterly futile in the material world. More critically, Maria's ongoing presence opened her consciousness to the reality of the hospital's invisible community. She began to perceive the legions of other lost souls, the trauma victims, the victims of long-term illness, and other healthcare workers, some who had lingered for years. These spirits were trapped by their own emotional residue, remorse over a professional failing, an unbreakable bond to a specific patient, or a mission they desperately felt was incomplete. This revealed the terrifying truth of the hospital. It is a complex parallel ecosystem where the living and the dead coexist, each seeking a cure, the living for the body, the discarnate for the soul. This invisible microcosm of intertwined suffering and perpetual motion underscores the pervasive nature of the spiritual world and the profound impact of our mundane habits on our eternal destiny. The saga of Dr. Rafael Montesinos, the distinguished cardiologist, adds another crucial layer to the understanding of spiritual denial. Dr. Montesinos was a man of science, a staunch materialist who placed his entire faith in the tangible, measurable reality of the flesh. His sudden passing, caused by a cerebral accident, left his spirit entirely unequipped for the spiritual reality he now faced. His immediate instinctive reaction was not confusion, but blunt denial, fueled by decades of ironclad conviction that consciousness could not survive the brain's death. This denial led to an atrocious form of spiritual torment. Driven by his lifelong habit and professional dominance, he repeatedly attempted to return to his surgical duties, only to confront the devastating sight of his hands passing through the tools and through the bodies of his patients. This cyclical frustration, the constant reminder of his powerlessness, and the negation of his deeply held beliefs, consumed him in a state of pure desperation. He was trapped by the very principles he had championed in life, unable to logically process a reality that his intellect had always dismissed as fantasy. Only through the persistent and loving efforts of spiritual assistance, targeted group prayers and clarification sessions, was the dense psychological barrier of his denial finally breached. The revelation of the continuance of life, once a point of fierce intellectual rejection, became his path to liberation, a process that was agonizing because it required the complete surrender of his most cherished earthly dogma. This case highlights that intellectual pride and philosophical rigidity can be spiritual anchors as potent as any material vice. The spiritual landscape of the hospital is not solely populated by confused or suffering souls. It is also a vital theater for spiritual assistance, rendered by entities of a far higher order. Dr. Montesinos's eventual lucidity allowed him to observe the silent, tireless work of these advanced beings. He described them as luminous entities, true missionary spirits, who acted as physicians of the unseen, operating with compassion and wisdom. Kardec codified the existence of these spirits, explaining that they are drawn to places of great suffering and need, not by low affinity, but by their elevated sense of universal charity. Their mission is twofold: to mitigate the physical and emotional pain of the incarnate, and to gently guide and assist the newly discarnate. In the operating rooms, they assist in the fluidic operations, subtly influencing the healing process and guiding the surgeon's hand. At the bedside of the dying, they act as comforters, helping to gently loosen the perispirit's bond to the body and preparing the soul for the grand transition, often projecting calming, loving thoughts to both the patient and the grieving family. These spirits use subtle fluidic energies, often described as light, calm, or warmth, to accelerate spiritual recovery and facilitate passage. Their work is a constant demonstration of the interconnectivity of all life and the existence of a perfectly organized spiritual hierarchy dedicated to service. The hospital, when viewed through this spiritual lens, is not merely a place of death but a laboratory of spiritual evolution, where higher spirits fulfill their mission of love, offering a profound lesson in true, unconditional altruism to all who can perceive it. The case of the nurse Carmen provides a deeply moving lesson on the corrosive, long-term spiritual power of guilt and the transcendental healing power of forgiveness. Carmen's 5 years of confinement to the hospital were not due to material attachment, denial, or ignorance, but to an overwhelming, ceaseless remorse stemming from a medical error that contributed to a child's death. Her spirit was bound by self-condemnation, reliving the moment of her mistake in an endless loop of self-punishment. This scenario perfectly illustrates Kardec's teaching that the spirit is the arbiter of its own punishment. The torment is internal, inflicted by the conscience itself. The remarkable aspect of Carmen's liberation was that it was not achieved through her own spiritual effort alone, but through the external power of love and forgiveness. The sincere, spiritually guided prayer of the child's family, offered during a visit to the hospital, carried a specific vibrational energy of absolution that reached Carmen's spirit. At that moment, she felt the invisible chains of her self-reproach break. Kardec extensively documented the profound principle that forgiveness is a two-way liberation. The forgiver frees themselves from the burden of resentment, and the forgiven spirit is released from the karmic and emotional weight of the offense. This single act of pure, selfless love transcended the barrier of death, proving that spiritual freedom is often attained not just by self-amendment, but by the redemptive grace offered by those we have wronged. This powerful episode reinforces that our relationships extend far beyond the veil of death, and the simple, heartfelt act of forgiveness can be a divine instrument of spiritual liberation. Allan Kardec's greatest practical contribution to this issue is the teaching that every incarnate person can and should become an active auxiliary for these lost and suffering spirits. This is not the exclusive domain of trained mediums. The core tool is accessible to all: sincere, charitable thought and prayer. Kardec established that thought is a powerful, directed energy, a fluidic current that, when charged with intention, love, and compassion, can cross the dimensional boundary. When a person directs a prayer of light and guidance toward the spirits in a hospital, that benevolent thought instantly acts as a vibrational lighthouse in their spiritual darkness. It does not force them to ascend, but it illuminates their path and provides the necessary spiritual energy, a gentle lift, to break their low vibrational attachment to the earthly plane. Kardec outlined 3 fundamental pillars of effective assistance. First, the sincere prayer of the heart, not a formulaic recitation, but a genuine desire for their relief. Second, the active sending of thoughts of love, light, and comprehension, visualizing them being surrounded by peace. And third, the mentalization that higher spirits are already assisting them, thus amplifying the benevolent spiritual force at work. This constant, gentle act of spiritual charity is a form of elevated karma creation. By giving spiritual aid without expectation of reward, the incarnate soul develops its own compassion and spiritual sensitivity, while the discarnate soul receives a direct, unburdened infusion of beneficial energy. The tragedy is that most people remain unaware of this immense power they possess, which could transform the anguish of lost souls into peace and guide them toward their destined evolution. The deep, rational knowledge unveiled by Allan Kardec regarding the reality of souls lost in hospitals should never be a source of paralyzing fear, but rather a profound catalyst for conscious responsibility and unshakable hope. The stories of Adelino, Maria, Raphael, and Carmen are not meant to frighten us about the process of death itself, but to instruct us about the absolute necessity of our moral and spiritual preparation during life. Death is simply a transition, and its character, whether serene and luminous or agonizing and confused, is determined by the attachments and convictions we cultivate while embodied. The greatest duty emerging from this knowledge is the moral obligation to share it, not to impose a belief system, but to offer a clear, logical explanation and a profound source of hope to those grappling with the loss of loved ones or the fear of their own impending passage. Kardec explained that the incarnate are the necessary spiritual guardians of the discarnate, and our role in the universal scheme is one of active, continuous service. He revealed that many people are specifically incarnated with a mission to assist suffering spirits, often developing a natural sensitivity or attraction to places of intense need like hospitals or cemeteries. This attraction is not morbid, it is a spiritual calling. Therefore, the next time you find yourself near a place of great suffering, let your immediate thought be one of sincere, loving mentalization. A silent prayer, a simple thought of light and peace directed to the invisible souls there, can be the singular, essential impulse needed to break a spirit's long-standing confusion and guide it toward the higher, more peaceful planes of existence. Your compassion, in its purest, most focused form, is a true instrument of spiritual liberation, converting you into an active, conscious worker in the divine, universal field of unconditional love.